It was supposed to be just another quiet night for Leo Carter, a single dad eating alone at a small diner after work. But when a trembling woman in a worn gray coat leaned over and whispered, "My son's hungry. Can we stay?" Everything changed. Her voice cracked with exhaustion, her boy's eyes hollow with hunger. Leo hesitated for a heartbeat, then slid his plate toward them. He didn't know that one act of kindness would rewrite all three of their lives. The rain fell steady that November evening, turning the streets of the Portland suburbs into rivers of reflected streetlights. Inside Mabel's grill, warmth glowed through fogged windows. The diner had been there for 30 years with its red vinyl booze and checkerboard floor, its smell of coffee and frying onions. Quiet jazz played from an old speaker behind the counter. It was the kind of place where people came not for the food, but for the feeling of not being completely alone. Leo Carter sat in his usual corner booth, still wearing his work uniform. At 36, he carried himself like a man who'd forgotten how to rest. His hair, dark brown and perpetually tousled, fell across his forehead. His hands, calloused from years of fixing air conditioners and heating systems, rested flat on the table. Those hands had built things, repaired things, held his dying wife's hand 3 years ago when cancer took her away. He'd raised his son, Evan, alone since then. The boy was 8 now, staying with a neighbor tonight so Leo could work late. Every day was the same rhythm. Wake before dawn, make breakfast, drop Evan at school, work until dark, pick him up, help with homework, tuck him in, then collapse in a bed and do it all again. Leo told himself he was fine with it, that this was what fathers did, that the ache in his chest would eventually fade. But tonight, sitting alone with a plate of meatloaf he barely tasted, Leo felt the weight of his solitude more than usual. The couple in the next booth laughed at something. A father and daughter shared a milkshake by the window, and Leo sat alone, the way he'd sat alone for 1,000 meals, wondering if this was all life had left for him. He didn't notice the woman at first. She stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from her thin gray coat. Her blonde hair hung in damp strands around a face that might have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion carved into it. She held the hand of a small boy, maybe 6 years old, whose eyes darted around the diner with the desperate hope of someone who hadn't eaten in too long. The woman approached the counter. Leo watched as she spoke quietly to the teenage waiter, saw the boy behind her shifting from foot to foot. The waiter shook his head. The woman's shoulders sagged. She glanced back at her son, and in that look, Leo saw something that pierced through his numbness. A mother's desperation, trying to hide from her child that she couldn't provide what he needed. Leo had seen that look before in the mirror. In the months after his wife died, when the medical bills kept coming and he'd stand in the grocery store calculating whether he could afford milk and bread both. Callista Monroe was 32 years old and had been living on the edge of disaster for 6 months. She'd worked as an accountant at Harrington Group, a mid-sized firm that promised stability and growth. She'd been good at her job, meticulous with numbers, respected by colleagues. Where her supervisor promised a promotion and a raise, she believed him. She'd signed a lease on a better apartment for her and her son Noah. She'd bought him new shoes. She'd let herself hope. Then one Monday morning, she arrived to find the office doors locked. No warning, no explanation, just a notice taped to the glass. Effective immediately, all operations suspended. Her department had vanished overnight. Her boss's phone went straight to voicemail. The promised raise never came. The promotion evaporated. The eviction notice came 2 months later. Then the car broke down. Then Noah got sick and needed medicine she could barely afford. She'd applied everywhere, grocery stores, call centers, restaurants, nothing. The recession had made jobs scarce, and a gap in employment made her applications disappear into silence. She and Noah ended up in a weekly rental motel, the kind with stained carpets and a heater that rattled. Tonight, she'd spent her last $17 on that room. They had nothing left for food. Pride had kept her from asking for help. Pride and shame and the stubborn belief that she could fix this herself. But watching her 6-year-old son grow thinner, seeing his energy fade, hearing him say, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm not that hungry," Pride couldn't feed him S.O. When she saw the diner's lights, and felt Noah's hand trembling in hers, she did something she'd never done before. She walked in and asked a stranger for mercy. The waiter, 17 and uncomfortable, told her they couldn't serve customers who couldn't pay. She understood. She nodded. She was about to leave when she noticed the man in the corner booth watching her. Something in his eyes wasn't pity. It was recognition. Callista didn't know what made her walk over to his table. Desperation, maybe, or the way he looked at Noah with a gentleness that reminded her people could still be kind. She approached slowly, pulling Noah behind her, and leaned down close enough that other diners wouldn't hear. "Sir," she whispered, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay strong. "My son's hungry. Can we stay? Just for a little while. He won't bother you. He needs something warm." Leo looked up at her, then at the boy. Noah's eyes were the most heartbreaking part. Huge and brown, and trying so hard to be brave. While his stomach clearly ached, the kid reminded Leo of Evan. That same age where childhood innocence met the harsh realization that the world could be cruel. For a moment, Leo said nothing. He felt every customer in the diner fade away. He felt his wife's voice in his memory. "You have a good heart, Leo. Don't let the world make you forget that." He looked at his plate, still half full. He looked at the woman's trembling hands. He looked at the boy. Then Leo did something that would change everything. He smiled. Not a big smile, but a real one. And he said, "Sit down. We'll share." Callista's breath caught. Noah's eyes went wide. "Really?" the boy whispered. "Really?" Leo said. He slid his plate to the center of the table and gestured to the empty seats. "Go on. It's still warm." Callista sank into the booth as if her legs had given out. Noah scrambled up beside her, staring at the food like it was a miracle. Leo raised his hand, catching the waiter's attention. "Can we get another plate here?" And a bowl of soup for the kid and hot chocolate. The waiter hesitated, but something in Leo's expression made him nod and disappear into the kitchen. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Callista's hands shook as she cut a piece of meatloaf and set it on the empty bread plate for Noah. The boy ate slowly, carefully like he was afraid the food might vanish if he moved too fast. Tears ran down Callista's face. Silent and unstoppable, she wiped them away quickly, trying to hide from her son that she was breaking. Leo pretended not to notice. He sipped his coffee and looked out the window at the rain. "Cold night," he said quietly. "Good night for soup." "Thank you," Callista managed. Her voice was barely audible. "You didn't have to. It's just food," Leo said. But they both knew it was more than that. It was dignity. It was acknowledgement that her son mattered, that she mattered. When the waiter brought the soup and hot chocolate, Leo ordered himself another coffee. The three of them sat together in that booth, not quite strangers, but not yet friends, held together by an act of simple humanity. Noah finished the soup and leaned against his mother, his eyelids heavy. The boy looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. Callista looked at Leo across the table. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Leo said. He understood what it felt like to be on the edge, to need help but be too proud to ask. He'd been there. "What's your name?" "Callista. Callista Monroe. This is Noah Leo Carter." He reached across the table and shook her hand. Her grip was firm despite the trembling. "You from around here?" "We were. We're figuring things out right now." Leo heard what she didn't say. He'd spoken those same careful words after his wife died, when well-meaning people asked how he was doing. Figuring things out meant barely surviving. It meant one crisis away from complete collapse. In the next booth, Evan's friend Evan would have liked Noah. Leo thought they had the same quiet seriousness. The same way of watching the world like they were trying to understand rules nobody had explained. They talked a little. Callista told him she'd lost her job. Leo mentioned he was a technician fixing HVAC systems. He told her about Evan. She told him Noah loved trucks and drawing. The conversation was small and careful, both of them dancing around the harder truths. When they finally stood to leave, the rain had gotten heavier. Callista pulled her thin coat tight. Leo looked at her worn shoes at Noah, shivering despite the warm meal, and made a decision. "I got my truck outside," he said. "Let me give you a ride. It's too cold to walk." Callista started to refuse to say they'd be fine. But Noah looked up at her with those tired eyes, and she found she couldn't say no. That's very kind of you. Leo's work truck was old but reliable, a battered Ford with tools rattling in the back. He helped Noah into the middle seat and turned the heat up high. Callista gave him an address, and he recognized the area. The weekly motel, the ones where people went when they'd run out of options. They drove through the rain in near silence. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm. Noah's head drooped against his mother's shoulder. Leo found himself thinking about his own son at home, warm and safe, and felt a deep gratitude mixed with guilt. Why did some children get safety while others went hungry? When they reached the motel, Leo saw Callista's face in the dashboard light. She looked embarrassed, ashamed of where she was living. He knew that feeling too. After his wife died and the medical bills buried him, he'd almost lost his own house. "Thank you," Callista said quietly. "For everything. For seeing us." That phrase stuck with Leo. For seeing us as if they'd been invisible until he noticed. "Take care of yourself," he said. "And Noah." She nodded and gathered her son. They disappeared into the motel, into a room with a flickering number 7 on the door. Leo sat in his truck for a long moment, engine running, watching the rain. Then he drove home through the empty streets, his mind full of a woman's whispered question and a boy's hollow eyes. He didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about Noah's careful way of eating, like he wasn't sure when the next meal would come. He thought about Callista's trembling hands and the weight of her gratitude. He thought about his wife, who had always believed in helping people, who had taught him that kindness wasn't weakness. The next morning, Leo went to work as usual. He fixed a broken furnace in an office building downtown. He replaced a compressor in a restaurant cooler. He did his job with his usual quiet competence. But part of his mind stayed in that diner booth, watching a mother and son share a plate of food like it was the most precious thing in the world. After work, he did something impulsive. He stopped at the grocery store and bought bread, peanut butter, apples, milk, cereal, basic things a kid could eat. Then he drove to the motel. He almost turned around 3 times. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? Showing up uninvited. But then he thought about Noah's face, and he couldn't make himself drive away. He knocked on door number 7. Callista answered, surprise and confusion crossing her features. "Leo, I was in the area," he said, knowing it was a transparent lie. "Thought maybe Noah might like some breakfast supplies. No pressure." He held up the grocery bags, suddenly feeling foolish. Callista stared at the bags, then at him, then at the bags again, her eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Leo said, "but I wanted to." She took the bags with shaking hands. Behind her, Noah appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up when he saw the bread. "Is that for us?" "Yeah, buddy," Leo said. "For you." Noah hugged his mother's leg, grinning. It was the first real smile Leo had seen on the boy's face. Callista wiped her eyes and looked at Leo with something like wonder. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." "I know what it's like," Leo said quietly, "to need help and not know where to find it. When my wife died, people helped me. Neighbors brought food. My boss gave me time off. A stranger paid for her funeral flowers. I wouldn't have made it without them." He shrugged. "Maybe this is just paying it forward." Callista nodded slowly. She looked like she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she managed. "Would you like to come in? It's not much." But Leo hesitated. He didn't want to intrude. But something in her expression, a desperate loneliness that matched his own, made him nod. Just for a minute, the room was exactly what he'd expected: .2 beds with faded covers, a TV bolted to the dresser, a tiny bathroom, but it was clean. Callista had made the best of it, hanging Noah's drawings on the walls, folding their clothes neatly on a chair. She was trying to create home in a place that wasn't meant for living. Noah immediately started telling Leo about a truck he'd drawn, pointing to a crayon sketch taped above the bed. Leo crouched down to look at it properly, asking questions about the truck's engine and tires. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious. For those few minutes, Noah was just a kid talking about trucks, not a child going hungry. Callista made instant coffee with the room's tiny pot. They sat on the edges of the beds, awkward, but somehow comfortable, talking about small things. Leo told her about Evan, about how his son wanted to be a scientist. Callista told him about Noah's dream to drive a big rig someday. They talked about Portland, about the rain, about nothing important and everything important. An hour passed before Leo realized it. He stood reluctantly. I should go. Evan will wonder where I am. Thank you, Callista said again. For the food, for listening, for she gestured vaguely, unable to articulate what he'd given them. Hope maybe, or just a reminder that good people still existed. Over the next week, Leo found himself returning to that motel 3 more times. He brought more food. He fixed the room's broken heater without being asked. He invited Callista and Noah to a park where Evan was playing and watched the 2 boys become instant friends, running and laughing while he and Callista sat on a bench talking. She told him more about Harrington Group, about the CEO who'd vanished with employee pension funds, about the investigation that was just beginning. She told him about her attempts to find work, about the rejections, about the fear that kept her awake at night. Leo told her about his wife's illness, about the medical bills that had almost destroyed him, about learning to be both mother and father to Evan. He told her about the Harrington Group, too, though he didn't realize the connection until she said the name. His wife had worked there years ago. She'd been one of the employees laid off in an earlier round of cuts, stressed and devastated just before her cancer diagnosis. They looked at each other with shared recognition. They'd both been victims of the same corporate cruelty, the same grinding machine that consumed ordinary people and spit them out. I am so sorry, Callista whispered. Not your fault, Leo said. You got caught in the same trap. Friendship grew between them. Tentative but real. Callista started coming to Leo's house for dinner. She insisted on helping cook, on cleaning dishes, on contributing in whatever way she could. She refused to be a charity case. Leo understood that pride was sometimes all a person had left. Evan and Noah became inseparable. They played with trucks in the backyard. They did homework together at Leo's kitchen table. They laughed at jokes. Only 8- and 6-year-olds found funny. Watching them, Leo felt something in his chest loosen. His son had been lonely, too. He realized they'd both been lonely, trapped in their small bubble of grief. And Callista, she started to smile more. The exhaustion in her eyes began to fade. She got a part-time job at a grocery store. Not much, but enough to move from the motel to a slightly better apartment. Leo helped her move, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs while the boys supervised. For a few weeks, life felt almost normal, almost good. Then the neighbor ruined everything. Mrs. Chun lived next door to Leo and had opinions about everything. She saw Callista's car parked outside several evenings a week. She saw Callista leaving Leo's house early one morning after falling asleep on the couch during a movie. She made assumptions. The gossip spread like infection. Leo Carter is shacking up with some homeless woman. That poor boy Evan exposed to who knows what. She's probably after his money. The cruelty of small communities dressed up as concern. Leo's boss at the HVAC company called him in. Look, I don't care what you do in your personal life, the man said, uncomfortable and stern at once. But customers are talking. They're saying things. If this becomes a problem for business, it's not what people think, Leo said. Then make sure it stays that way. I like you, Leo, but I've got a company to run. Leo went home angry and frustrated. He found Callista in his kitchen making spaghetti for dinner. The boys were in the living room building a fort. Everything looked warm and safe and right. He almost didn't tell her, but she saw it in his face. What happened, he told her. He watched her expression close off, watched shame and anger and resignation pass across her features. I should go, she said quietly. No, Leo said. People are idiots. Let them talk. Leo, you could lose your job. I can't let that happen. You've done so much for us already. I don't care what they say, but I do. Her voice was firm. I won't be the reason your life falls apart. They argued about it. Noah wandered in, asking if dinner was ready, and they both stopped, pasting on smiles for the boys. But the damage was done. Callista had already decided that night. After Callista and Noah left, after Evan was asleep, Leo sat alone in his kitchen. He felt the walls of his life closing in again. He tried to do something good, and the world had punished him for it. Maybe that's just how things worked. Maybe kindness really was weakness, He didn't know that 3 blocks away, Callista was packing their belongings. She left a note on the table of their apartment. "Thank you for reminding me. Kindness still exists. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. Please don't try to find us." Then she woke Noah gently, told him they had to go, and led him into the night. The bus left at 2 o'clock in the morning. Callista and Noah boarded with everything they owned in 2 bags. Noah was too tired to ask questions. He just leaned against his mother and dozed while she stared out the window at the disappearing city, tears running silently down her face. Leo discovered they were gone the next morning. He drove to their apartment and found it empty. He saw the note on the table, read it 3 times, and felt something crack in his chest. He'd lost people before. His parents years ago, his wife, but this felt different. This felt like he'd failed. He drove through the rain, searching, checking bus stations and shelters, asking if anyone had seen a blonde woman with a little boy. Nothing. She'd vanished. Evan cried when Leo told him Noah had moved away. "But we were friends," the boy said, heartbroken. "Why didn't he say goodbye?" Leo had no answer. He held his son and felt his own loss echo through the house that suddenly seemed too big and too empty. Days passed, then a week. Leo went through the motions of living, working, taking care of Evan. But something vital had gone out of him. He'd opened his heart. After 3 years of keeping it locked, and now it hurt worse than before. Then 10 days after Callista disappeared, Leo saw something on the evening news. The reporter stood outside a courthouse downtown. The investigation into Harrington Group has resulted in multiple arrests today. CEO Marcus Sheffield and CFO David Park are accused of embezzling over $12 million in employee pension funds. Several former employees have come forward as witnesses, including Callista Monroe, whose testimony provided crucial evidence of fraudulent accounting practices. Leo's heart stopped. The screen showed footage of the courthouse steps. Press crowded around, and there, looking thin and terrified and determined, was Callista. He was in his truck before he'd fully decided to move, leaving Evan with a neighbor and driving downtown too fast. He had to find her. He had to make sure she was okay. The courthouse was chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Lawyers pushed through crowds. Leo searched frantically, finally spotting Callista near a side entrance, trying to avoid cameras. She looked overwhelmed, reporters crowding her, microphones shoved in her face. "Miss Monroe, did you participate in the fraud? Were you stealing from the company? How does it feel to betray your former employer?" Leo saw red. He pushed through the crowd, positioning himself between Callista and the cameras. "Back off," he said loudly. "Give her space." Callista's eyes went wide. "Leo, what are you doing here?" "Making sure you're okay." He looked at the reporters. She didn't steal anything. She survived. She was a victim. And now she's helping bring the real criminals to justice. Show some respect. Something about his anger. His protective stance made the reporters pause. A few cameras turned away. Others lowered their microphones. The crowd's energy shifted from aggressive to uncertain. Leo guided Callista away from the press into the relative quiet of the courthouse hallway. She was shaking. "You shouldn't have come. This would just make more gossip." "I don't care about gossip," Leo said. "I care about you. Why did you leave? Why didn't you tell me about this?" "Because I didn't want to drag you further into my mess. The FBI contacted me. They needed me to testify about the accounting files I'd worked on. I knew it would be public, that my name would be everywhere. I couldn't let that touch you and Evan, so you were protecting us." "I was trying to." Leo laughed. A short, bitter sound. "You're testifying against criminals who stole millions, putting yourself in the spotlight, facing all this alone. And you're worried about protecting me?" He shook his head. "Callista, I'm supposed to be the one protecting you." "Why?" she asked. The question was genuine, confused. "Why you care so much? We're nothing to you." "You're not nothing," Leo said. The words came out harder than he intended. "You and Noah, you're not nothing. You became something the moment you whispered that question in the diner. You became something when Noah smiled at my son. You became something when I realized how empty my house felt without you both in it." Callista stared at him. "Leo, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know you matter to me. To Evan, you're not alone in this." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "They vindicated me, the FBI. They confirmed I had no knowledge of the fraud. And there's a company in Seattle that offered me a position, a real job with benefits. I could actually take care of Noah properly. That's amazing, Leo said, and meant it even as his heart sank at the thought of her moving to Seattle. The trial will take months, Callista continued. I have to stay in Portland to testify. I don't know where we'll live or how we'll manage, but stay with us. Leo interrupted. She blinked. What? Stay with me and Evan. I have 2 spare bedrooms. You and Noah can have them. No strings attached. Just a safe place while you deal with all this legal stuff. Let me help, please. People will talk. Let them. Leo's voice was firm. I'm done caring what people think. I tried being safe and keeping my distance, and it made everyone miserable. You need help. I can provide it. That's all that matters. Callista studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Okay, but I'm paying rent and helping with groceries. I won't be a burden. Deal, Leo said, knowing he'd never actually accept her money, but willing to let her have this small pride. They walked out of the courthouse together. Cameras flashed, but Leo kept his hand on her back, steady and supportive. They drove back to his house in comfortable silence. When they arrived, Evan saw Noah getting out of the truck and screamed with joy, running to hug his friend. The 2 boys tumbled onto the lawn together, laughing. Callista watched them with tears in her eyes. I made so many mistakes, but leaving you was the worst one. You were trying to do the right thing, Leo said. That's not a mistake. That's just love looking like fear. Over the following weeks, life found a new rhythm. Callista and Noah moved into Leo's spare bedrooms. She testified at preliminary hearings. Her testimony steady and damning. The media coverage was intense, but gradually shifted from accusatory to supportive. People began to see her as a hero, a whistleblower who'd helped expose corruption. The Harrington Group executives were convicted on multiple counts. Callista's former boss, Marcus Sheffield, got 15 years in prison. Restitution funds were set up for former employees. Callista received a settlement. Not huge, but enough to rebuild savings enough to breathe again. The job in Seattle was patient, willing to wait until the trial concluded. But as months passed, Callista found herself less and less interested in moving. Portland had Leo. It had Evan. It had the strange, imperfect family they'd built in the wake of disaster. One evening in early spring, 8 months after that first night in the diner, Callista baked a cake. It was Noah's birthday, and both families celebrated together. They ate pizza and sang off-key and watched the boys tear through presents with chaotic joy. After the kids went to bed, Leo and Callista sat on the back porch. The rain had stopped, leaving everything clean and fresh. Stars were visible for the first time in weeks. I turned down the Seattle job, Callista said quietly. Leo turned to look at her. You did? I found something here. Local firm, good pay, reasonable hours. I start next month. She paused. I couldn't leave. Now when everything I need is here. The job? Leo asked. You? Callista said. And Evan. This life we've stumbled into. That night at the diner, I thought it was the end for us. I thought we'd lost everything. But you made it a beginning. Leo's heart hammered in his chest. Callista, I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right time, but there never seems to be one. So, I'm just going to say it. I'm in love with you. I have been for months. I wake up every morning grateful you're here. I go to bed every night hoping you'll still be here tomorrow. You and Noah, you become my family. And if you feel anything like what I feel, she kissed him. It was sudden and soft and tasted like birthday cake. When she pulled back, she was smiling. I feel exactly like what you feel. I've been terrified to say it. Terrified you'd think I was just grateful or dependent. But Leo, I love you. Not because you helped us, but because of who you are. Because you see people when they're invisible. Because you're patient with boys who talk too much about trucks. Because you make terrible coffee and never complain about doing dishes. Leo laughed, relief flooding through him. My coffee isn't that bad. It's awful, Callista said, laughing too. But I love it anyway. They kissed again, longer this time. The spring air cool around them and the stars bright overhead. Inside the house, 2 boys slept peacefully, dreaming of trucks and science, and all the adventures that lay ahead. And on that porch, two broken people found themselves whole again, held together by something as simple and profound as kindness. 1 year later, Christmas lights glowed warm in Leo Carter's windows. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine. A tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments the boys had made at school. Presents wrapped in cheerful paper waited beneath it. Callista, now 6 months pregnant with a daughter she and Leo had named Hope, stirred gravy at the stove. Her engagement ring caught the light. The wedding had been small, just family and close friends in the backyard last June. She'd worn a simple dress. Leo had cried during his vows. The boys had carried the rings and only dropped them once. Evan and Noah, now 9 and 7, were inseparable. They played video games in the living room, arguing good-naturedly about strategy. They had the easy friendship of brothers, the kind built on years of knowing someone completely. Leo hung the last wreath on the front door and stepped back to admire it. He thought about how different life looked now compared to that rainy November night over a year ago. How empty his world had been, how close he'd come to staying locked in grief forever. "Ready?" Callista called from inside. "Ready," Leo said. They drove through the decorated streets to Mabel's Grill. The diner looked exactly the same, still glowing with warm yellow light, still smelling like coffee and home. They'd come here every few months, an unspoken pilgrimage to the place where everything changed. The same teenage waiter, now a year older, seated them. They didn't request it, but they always ended up in the same corner booth. The boys colored on placemats while Leo and Callista looked at menus they'd long since memorized. "Remember this?" Callista asked, gesturing around. "Every second," Leo said. "I was so scared that night, so ashamed. I thought we'd hit bottom and there was nowhere left to fall. I was so lonely," Leo admitted. "I convinced myself that staying alone was noble, that if I just focused on Evan, I'd be okay. I was lying to myself." Noah looked up from his drawing. "Dad, what are you talking about?" They told the boys the story, of course, how Mom and Dad had met. But at their age, it was just a story, not the desperate reality it had been. "Just remembering," Leo said, ruffling Noah's hair. The boy had started calling him Dad 6 months ago, and every time he heard it, Leo's heart expanded. They ordered soup and sandwiches. The same waiter brought hot chocolate for the kids, extra marshmallows this time. They ate slowly, savoring the moment, the warmth, the simple joy of being together. As they finished, Callista smiled at Leo across the table, the same table where she'd once whispered a desperate question. "So," she said playfully, "whose turn is it to whisper now?" Leo pretended to think about it. Then he leaned forward, his eyes bright with love and mischief and absolute certainty. "How about you both stay forever?" Callista's laugh was bright and clear. "Forever sounds perfect." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and quiet, covering the city in white. The diner's lights glowed warm against the winter darkness. Inside, a family sat together, laughing, while Christmas music played softly in the background. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The end came not with drama, but with peace. Leo and Callista raised their children in that house in Portland. Noah grew up to drive trucks, just like he dreamed. Evan became an engineer. Hope, their daughter, inherited her mother's way with numbers and her father's kindness. They had Sunday dinners and school plays and arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash. They returned to Mabel's Grill every Christmas. Always to the same booth, always ordering soup. They watched the city change around them. Watched the diner gradually renovate its interior while keeping its heart the same. They grew older together, their love deepening from passion into partnership, into the kind of bone-deep companionship that comes from weathering life side by side. And they never forgot that rainy November night when a whispered question changed everything. When kindness proved stronger than circumstance. When two broken people found each other at exactly the right moment and chose not to stay strangers. Because sometimes the most important moments in our lives start with the smallest acts of courage. A mother desperate enough to ask. A man kind enough to answer. A plate of food shared. And from that seed, a whole life grew.